Are you dealing with dysfunction in your relationship? Have you been wondering where it comes from and why it exists? Either you're noticing that dysfunction in yourself or you're experiencing it from your partner. Well, today we're going to talk about that topic. We're going to talk about what is the function of the dysfunction in your marriage. And I'm going to help you break down a little bit where this dysfunction might be coming from and a few tips or tricks that you might be able to use to help resolve that dysfunction in your marriage. So stay tuned. All right, what is the function of the dysfunction in your marriage? This question comes from the philosophy and the idea that all behavior serves a purpose, right? So if all behavior has a function, if it comes from a place that makes sense to the individual, at least on a subconscious level, right, then it means that that behavior is meaningful, as dysfunctional as it may be. And oftentimes when I'm doing counseling with couples, I'm working with couples in a professional environment that way, I'm asking myself this question: what is the function of this dysfunction that I'm watching? The couple has come in and they're sharing with me their story. And in that story, I can see and feel the dysfunction that's playing out in their relationship. And they're asking me for help. They're like, Nevin, help us work through this dysfunction, right? And the solution to their problem begins with asking this question: what is the function of the dysfunction that the couple is experiencing? Because until we have a good understanding of why the behavior exists, we won't really be able to come up with a meaningful solution to that behavior, right? We want to figure out, what is the purpose of that behavior, as dysfunctional as it may be? How can it make sense that it exists? And once we understand that, we might be able to replace that behavior with something else that still serves that purpose, while also changing the environment of the relationship. And that's what we want. We want to help couples heal in a way that they can experience lasting change. And that means they need to replace the function of their dysfunctional behavior with a more meaningful, a more purposeful, a healthier set of behaviors. And so that's what I'm helping couples do every day. And I wanted to kind of walk you through that process as well. So let's begin with a couple of stories that I'd like to share with you about clients that I've worked with in the past, so that you can see a little bit better how this principle plays out in relationships. The first individual that I'll share with you about was a woman that I was working with. And her and her husband were coming in for treatment. And she was having a really hard time becoming vulnerable in the relationship. The relationship had progressed to the point where they were engaged. They were preparing to be married. And as they were preparing to be married, the relationship had kind of hit this plateau in vulnerability. She had opened up quite a bit about her life, her past, her siblings, her parents, her family. You know, all those basic questions and information that you tend to look for as you're dating an individual. But now that they're engaged and they're talking a little bit more deeply, right, like experiences in their life that have shaped them, that have impacted them for significant good, or have hurt them on a significant level, it was really hard for her to go there. She had a hard time kind of breaking through that vulnerability and sharing in a deep way about herself. The other thing that her husband started to notice is that it was very difficult for her to trust him. She started feeling hesitancy about his explanations of where he was going, things that were going on in his world. And when he was kind to her and nice to her, complimented her, or supported her, or gave her a gift, things along those lines, she became very suspicious. It was hard for her to receive those with joy. Instead, she was always looking for, what is the angle of you being nice, right? Like what function is that serving? What purpose is it serving that you're being nice to me, right? What is your angle to be so kind to me? So he was kind of caught off guard by this, right? He assumed that in his thoughtfulness, she would receive that with joy and happiness and feel closer to him, more connected. And it makes sense that she should, right? She ought to feel more close and connected. Those are really kind investments that he's making. But instead, she would respond with suspicion, with irritation even sometimes, and sometimes withdraw in the relationship. And he was so confused by that. And she was kind of confused by it too. All she knew is that it made her feel uncomfortable. And she didn't want to be close or connected to him when he would be overly nice to her, right? And so this is a state that they came in to see me. They're preparing for marriage. They're both scared to move forward in their relationship because they're running into this dynamic of distrust. and suspicion and irritation that neither one of them could really understand. So that's one story of this question, right, that we might ask ourselves: what is the function of that dysfunction that this couple is experiencing? So we dug into that, right, trying to understand the behavior before we encourage it to shift, because we could just jump in and say, hey, to this woman, we could say, hey, he's doing nice things. You need to work on receiving those well, right? Your behavior isn't helpful to the connection that your partner's looking for. So you need to work on that, right? And we could give her tasks and challenges to kind of focus on improving that behavior. But that's likely not going to be sustainable long term until she understands and he understands what is the function of that dysfunctional behavior. Where does it come from? Why is it happening? Right? If we can understand that on a deeper level, we might be able to help this couple heal long term, right? So we dug in a little bit. We dug into this couple's experience. And as we understood a little bit more what was going on, we realized that in her childhood, her father was pretty harsh, right? So he wasn't harsh as far as like physically abusive harsh, but emotionally, he wasn't really connected. He was absent emotionally, right? He was often cold, disconnected, preoccupied. There wasn't a lot in her childhood that she could really relate to the feelings of a man, right? He wasn't thoughtful of her as a father. He didn't spend a lot of time with her. He was absent often, preoccupied, all those things, right? So we found out at a really young age, she doesn't have a lot of experience with a man who's kind and generous, right? Most of the men in her world, her father, a brother, and a couple of the people that she had dated, were a little bit more emotionally reserved, disconnected, not present. So she doesn't have a lot of experience with kindness, generosity, sensitivity coming from a man, right? That wasn't part of her experience growing up. So that was one clue to the puzzle, right? That this is an experience that's uncomfortable for her and kind of new and unknown to her. The other thing that we discovered as we dug into her history a little bit more, we explored her past, is that she had been married previously for several years. That marriage didn't last a long time. But in that marriage, her husband was very charismatic. He showed up and presented very outgoing, very charming, very engaging, right? He was a charismatic man. And it wasn't until about a year and a half into their relationship that she found out he was also a compulsive liar, right? So she found out that he had schemes going on with work. She found out that he had lied to her several times about other relationships he was having, right? She found out that some of the places that he told her gifts came from weren't accurate, that he was caught up in some fraud, and it ended up being a really disappointing and betraying end to their relationship, as all of these kind of lies and false identities came out in the relationship. So she was coming into her current relationship with her partner that I was working with. She was coming into that several years after this relationship ended, her previous marriage ended, right? And so that had added to this issue, right? That this first time she had experience with somebody who was kind and generous, loving, right? She's realizing in that interaction that it was all fake. It was all false. It was a lie and a manipulation, right? That there was active deception happening behind that kindness and behind that lovingness, right? That she was experiencing. So that added to the puzzle too, right? That her childhood hadn't given her a lot of experience being nurtured, emotionally nurtured and connected to kindness, sensitivity, generosity from a male. And then her previous marriage, the first time that she kind of experienced some of that, left her pretty jaded, right? It was manipulative in nature. And as a result, she came out of that kind of associating kindness, generosity, sensitivity to an angle, right? She associated it with when somebody, especially a male, is acting with you in that way, they have some sort of an angle. It's part of some manipulative scheme, because men aren't naturally like that. So if one shows up that way, he's probably trying to put one over on you. He's probably trying to deceive you. So from that angle, we could start to understand the function of her dysfunctional pattern. Her dysfunctional pattern being that she would become suspicious and she would become irritated and she would even kind of withdraw in the relationship as her partner was kind to her, as her fiance did nice things for her. We could understand why that was happening, her withdrawal, her irritation, her suspicion, right? Because of these things that she'd been through. And we were able to take some really meaningful steps in their relationship to help her work through that, to heal that past, right? To develop more realistic expectations for the present, and then to assess more in real time the attributes of her current partner, right? Her fiance, his values, his morals, the things that he guided and directed his life by. We were able to help her connect to those things, both with him and those around him who know him well. And as a result of that, we were able to slowly help her get more comfortable with his kindness, right? Instead of receiving it with suspicion, irritation, and sometimes even withdrawal, she was able to start to receive it with love, right? And as she practiced taking it in from that angle, understanding the function behind those dysfunctional patterns in her, she was able to engage her relationship today much more than living out her relationships of the past with her current partner today, right? And that's what we wanted. We wanted her to be able to be present with her partner, right? To really absorb information from that relationship, not just carry reactions from previous ones that have hurt her into her current relationship. As long as she was living out those past relationships with her current fiance, they weren't going to be able to progress. So that was one example, right, of digging in and understanding the function of the dysfunction. Another one that I'll share with you is a gentleman that I was working with, and he grew up in a really verbally abusive home. His mother dealt with major depression, and as a result of that, he experienced a lot of criticism growing up, right? And he spoke about that at the beginnings of our therapy. He talked about the criticism that he experienced from his mother and how difficult that was for him, that he was never good enough, he would say to his mother. She would always find something wrong, right? If he had an A minus, he was in trouble for not getting an A, right? If he cleaned his room, she was always able to find a sock out of place or a shelf that hadn't been dusted and would come down hard on him, right? If he tried out for the baseball team, she would come to the games and after the game critique all the negatives, right? She wouldn't highlight and celebrate his successes. She was always pointing out the flaw. He grew up in that environment. And as he grew up in that environment, it really shaped the way that he saw himself and the way that he felt. He had to defend himself, probably around the age 14, 15. He started to develop the ability to defend his own honor, right? He would self-talk, right? He would give himself positive affirmations and say, don't listen to your mom. You are good, right? Like you are great. You're going to do great things in the world. He had to kind of build himself up because he wasn't getting any of that from his mother. His father had left at a young age, so he was raised in a single parent household, and it was highly critical. So fast forward now, he and his spouse came into therapy after being married for 15 years, right? They've been married for 15 years and they're coming to therapy for the first time. And the biggest complaint that they're having is she feels like she can't talk to him about anything important in the relationship without him becoming defensive, right? And he admits that he doesn't want to hear her criticism. He's sick of her ragging on him and he doesn't want to hear it, right? He wants a wife that accepts him, that loves him, that builds him, that praises him, right? And she wants to be all those things. She loves him dearly. She's grateful for him as a life partner. They've raised several children together. But she's in this spot where she needs to be able to communicate with him about critical items. And she's not sure how to do that without this big defensive response coming out in him. So here they come in therapy. And with the little information I've shared with you so far, you can trace back and understand a little bit the dysfunction in the relationship, right? What is the function of that dysfunction, right? Why is he becoming so defensive? And you're putting that puzzle piece together really well, probably, right? You're able to look back and say, well, he was raised by a mother who criticized him constantly, that he never felt good enough for her. So now in his present day, anytime it feels like somebody is giving him feedback that questions his value, right, that brings into question his worth and his aptitude, he walls up really quick, right? He decided a long time ago, I'm not going to take crap from nobody. And as a result of that, he forms a really thick wall, a thick defense against anybody who might have something critical to share with him. And it's causing him problem in his life now. His wife doesn't feel like she can talk to him ever because he becomes so reactive and so defensive so quickly. And she's left with this dynamic that says either I don't bring these things up and I silently deal with them in a way that hurt me and cause me problem and resentment, or I voice them and they hurt him and cause him problem and resentment, right? It's quite a tough gridlock, pretty dysfunctional. But we're understanding the function of that dysfunction, right? He decided a long time ago he was going to protect his self-worth. And as a result of that, he has a hair trigger, right? He's triggered very easily by anything that sounds of a critical nature. So a lot of our work together then became helping him to understand where this pattern comes from and helping her understand where the pattern comes from. That she can depersonalize a little bit, right? Not take so sensitively his defensiveness, that she can understand the context of it in a way that helps her have a little bit more empathy for his reactions without feeling so personally hurt that they happen. And really helping him understand the roots of that pattern, right? Why he's become so defensive. We even celebrated that a little bit with him. We were sad that nobody else in his childhood could really give him that message except for himself. And we're grateful that he came to his own defense and decided he was going to protect his worth and his value. And then we helped highlight for him the problem that it's created, though, that when people in his present day do love him and want to be closer to him and want to talk about things in the relationship that keep distance between them, that he perceives that very easily, very sensitively. He perceives it as being critical of him. And so we helped him reframe what is feedback, especially from your loving partner, right? Your spouse that you know loves you. She's your most faithful, loyal companion in your world. When she's trying to talk to you about a thing, she's not attempting to break down your self-esteem. She's not attacking your character, right? She's expressing love. She's noticed something that's between the two of you in the relationship. She wants to get it out from between the two of you, so that she can be closer to you. Why? Because she loves you, right? And as he started to reframe, what is this feedback that I'm getting? Why does she approach me with feedback? He was able to take the meaning of that feedback and put it in a different frame. He was able to reframe it. At this point, you'll remember the YouTube video that we did on this subject. I'll post it right here so you can take a look if you want to learn a little bit more about that strategy of reframing in a relationship. So it became really helpful for this couple as well to understand the function behind that dysfunctional pattern, that they were able to reframe it for themselves in a way that it could feel easier and better. They would take it less personal. And then they were able to do some behaviors in the relationship, practice some interventions in the relationship to help heal those patterns for good, right? To help encourage connection going forward instead of this disconnect. So that's my challenge to you in your relationship. I would invite you to identify something that's dysfunctional. Either you recognize it in yourself, this is something dysfunctional that I do in my relationship that causes problems, or a pattern that you recognize in your partner, something that they do that creates problems in the relationship, dysfunction in the relationship, right? So identify one of those things and then try to do what we did with these two couples I shared with you. Take a step back in your life and ask yourself, where does this pattern come from? Why do I respond in this way, right? What are some things that maybe I've been through in my life that have shaped the way that I am today, right? And how does that make sense? Based on where I've been and what I've been through, how does that help me understand why I do that thing today? And as you identify it in yourself, maybe share it with your partner as well. Take some ownership in that a little bit, right? And letting them know, hey, I've been thinking about this thing that I do that's not so helpful for us. And here's what I'm discovering about where it comes from, right? Or you might ask your partner more questions about themselves, not in a critical way, like, hey, why do you do that dumb thing that you do, right? Instead, in a loving way. Hey, I've noticed that it's hard for you sometimes when I try to give you feedback. I was just wondering where that might come from, like what you may have been through in your life that makes that hard sometimes, that you feel like I'm attacking you when I'm really just trying to understand you. Digging into that a little bit and seeing if you can't identify the function in your dysfunctional patterns today. In the comments below, I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, right? If you've gained an awareness or an insight, something that you've discovered as you listen to this video, as you apply this on your own, we love to converse with you about those, hear about those, and share those with our other viewers. Thank you again for joining us today. I wish you the best in identifying the function and the dysfunction that you're experiencing. And if we can ever be helpful to you in that process here at Renew Relationship Counseling, reach out to us. We'd love to provide you some therapeutic support, coaching support, or any other kind of support that we can give you along your journey. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to being with you again soon. Take care.